The low, quiet hum of the quadrator drone was drowned out by the squeals of delight of the children invited to Dee Dee's 12th birthday party. The parents of Dee Dee's 5 invited friends had dropped them off early, and now all 6 girls were playing in the backyard waiting for the message that the cake and ice cream were ready. I sighed thinking about it. Our backyard. Yes, it had been our backyard before the final divorce decree about 2 months ago. Now it was just my backyard, except that it indirectly belonged to my son, 14-year-old Dylan, who sat on the patio watching everything with contrived indifference, and my daughter, Deanna, we call her Dee Dee, 11. Well, 12 as of today, hence the birthday. My little princess was only a year away from adolescence, God help me. We survived Dylan's transition ritual. Well, so far. Now all I had to do was find a way to help Dee Dee through this minefield on the road to womanhood, without guidance or help. Damn, this is a special day for Dee Dee, the last birthday of her childhood before entering the dramatic, luxurious, and painful period of adolescence. I had already decided days before that I would not allow the joy of this day to be overshadowed by thoughts of Dee Dee's bitch of a mother, my ex-wife Donna. Instead, I would focus on giving Dee Dee an unforgettable time, as well as preparing for the entertainment I had organized with my friend and now partner in our exciting and promising to be profitable business venture, Nirmal Pradhan. Easy, Diz, I said to Nirmal, as we operated our remote-controlled aerial platforms with the tablet controllers we each had in our hands. You don't want to drop them too soon. They might get away in time, and we won't have time to take advantage of the full effect. Just make sure you aim low over the back fence and hit the lights at the right time, my friend of Indian descent replied. Once you get them focused away from the real threat, then blast away. In the 6 years he lived in the United States, he had almost lost his sing-songy rhythm of speech typical of subcontinent residents. In addition, living in Tennessee for 4 of those 6 years had led to a southern softening of his English pronunciation and the introduction of terms like y'all into his everyday vocabulary. Sometimes he even joked with me that in Knoxville, he had learned that y'all was singular and all y'all was plural. 6 teenage girls celebrating a birthday party moved around the backyard looking at the quadricopter hovering above them. It made a low humming sound, traveled in one direction for a short distance, and then hovered again. The girls followed it, but found themselves below it. About 20 meters away from them, it moved in the other direction again, and the girls rushed over there. Underneath the quadricopter drone that was moving about 8 meters above them, the one we called Enola Gay, was a round object with ribbons around it. We led the girls to believe that it was an air piñata and that it would drop little candies on them at just the right moment. The other quadricopter, the one Deez and I called E.T., we kept out of sight for now. It was operated only by me, and for the moment it was turned off. It was quietly preparing for flight in a small clearing in the woods on the other side of our fence. And I set the tablet controller aside and reached for a bottle of Budweiser. Black Crown. I'd been choosing this beer more and more lately, as I'd felt the need for a slightly higher alcohol content after the unpleasant events of my divorce. But I wasn't going to get drunk tonight, since I was going to be driving later. I just liked the taste of it. So I limited myself to 2 glasses. I coughed, swallowing wrongly because I was distracted for a moment by her appearance. I knew Dee Dee had invited Donna, my ex-wife, to her party, but it still upset me when I saw her walking out the back door onto the patio like she owned the place. Still, the arrogant queen bee lording over everyone who fell under her bad influence. She surprised me as I didn't notice her car pull up. I had to cough a couple times to clear my airways of the beer that had accidentally gotten in there when she distracted me for a split second. Donna still looked good, but no longer as spectacular as she had a few months ago. Her shoulder-length blonde hair, green eyes, and fantastic body always made passers-by, if not stop, at least slow their step. Now she was still very attractive, but she had put on a little weight, which I'm sure she resented. The status as the most attractive woman she had claimed for most of her life since she turned 15 was now in jeopardy. Placing the wrapped package on the table set aside for Dee Dee's gifts, she looked directly at me. At first, there was no expression on her face, but then it was quickly replaced by a brief look of delight, lacking any emotion, then a brief moment of sadness, followed by a clear look of determination to embrace the moment. She sighed, trying to portray a polite, welcoming smile. "Glenn, was all she said, walking over to where I stood. Donna, was all I replied, turning to look at our daughter and her friends. I made several successful attempts to relieve the tension that crept into my body from her mere presence. She could still excite me, but it was a different kind of excitement these days. I glanced at my watch and noticed that time was slipping away from me if I wasn't more attentive. I set the bottle of beer aside and picked up the tablet controller. "It's time, Diz," I said to my friend, who was standing a few feet away from me with the controller in his hands. Focused on controlling the Enola Gay, I couldn't tell if he knew Donna was here. But I knew that, other than the fact that he would find her presence here mildly unpleasant, he didn't care. "Okay," he replied, simply nodding as he maneuvered the Enola Gay closer to the back of the yard and closer to the fence. I raised my tablet controller and tapped the spot that was supposed to activate the ET remotely. I didn't hear it come to life over our backyard fence, but I noted a system status indicator on the tablet that reported that all systems were operational, as they say at NASA. As Dees moved the Enola Gay around a bit to distract the girls, I lifted the ET from its seat and moved it to a height from which it could barely skirt the trees on its way to our yard. On the inset screen at the bottom left of the tablet screen, I could see what the ET was seeing, with a miniature camera transmitting a signal over a carrier wave in the wireless frequency band to my controller. With another on-screen remote, I could remotely move the camera so that its field of view rotated in a 360-degree arc on a gimbal mount, and even zoom in and out. But that wasn't really necessary today. Nor was the remote recording capability built into the tablet's controller needed. The girls were so focused on the Enola Gay that they didn't notice the ET coming down the hill, skirting the last of the trees on its way to our back fence. I heard Donna beside me take a deep breath in surprise at seeing the ET. She was about to yell a warning when I bellowed at her. Not a sound. I didn't look at her, but I could tell she was a little pissed off. I hadn't said a harsh word to her before our divorce proceedings began, and she wasn't used to receiving them. I don't know if it was the determination in my voice or her surprised momentary indignation that made her exhale instead of calling the girls in and ruining the surprise. All I know is that for her own reasons, she chose to remain silent while I remotely guided the ET over the back fence and moved it closer to where the girls were congregating, but out of their sight. I alternately touched two dots on the control screen, quickly engaging the two ET functions necessary to effect the surprise. Two very bright red and green strobe lights began alternately flashing as the ED soared to a height a head taller than the tallest girl in the group. A split second later, a sound effect rang out. "Whoop! Whoop!" came a loud signal that mimicked the rumble of a police cruiser. The girls shrieked and turned around in unison to see the frightening sight of two bright flashing strobe lights directly above and behind where they were standing. In that moment of paralysis, I heard Diz utter, "Bombs away." And as I looked up from my clipboard, I saw Enola Gay release a round, ribbon-adorned object dangling below her. The object had only fallen about a meter when a sudden explosion with a slight pop erupted from its bowels and the object disintegrated above the girls' heads. Pieces of tape exploded around them seconds after a light jet of water hit them, turning into a cone 6 meters in diameter as the explosion of plastic CO2 gas detonated inside the balloon. As the Enola Gay began to make its way back toward the patio and D's, I saw a rope with the remnants of the detonation device dangling under the landing gear. None of the bomb components had shattered enough to harm the girls. "D's!" I heard Dee Dee shout, part indignant, part joking, as she turned and saw D's and me laughing at them. I knew she was mostly reacting to being startled by the suddenness of the event Dee Dee and I had orchestrated. The splash of water from the balloon wasn't enough to ruin their clothes or, God forbid, their hair. Dee Dee had already started stomping over to where I was standing with Donna to express my displeasure when I heard Donna next to me make a sound like gagging. Turning toward her, I saw Donna's eyes wide open and her mouth slightly ajar. She was clearly surprised, but there was also something else. That something became apparent when she turned to me with an expression of rage and contempt. "It was you, you bloody bastard," she said in a low whisper. She then walked over to me and slapped me across the face. It was a good thing I didn't hit the tablet controller screen when I jerked back from her blow, or I might have smashed the ET or hit one of the girls when it moved. As it was, ET just hovered in place. She pulled herself together and said, "You know, Sometimes you can be a real son of a bitch. Not known for my wit and ability to come up with quick retorts, I surprised myself by replying rather quickly. You mean without being a real Class A slut who cheats on me everywhere? Donna's face turned red and she froze, contemplating how to repeat the slap she had received a minute earlier. But when Dee Dee walked over to me and put her arms around my waist, Donna pulled herself together and squatted slightly in front of Dee Dee, so that her face was at the level of our daughter's face. Happy birthday, sweetie. She reached out to touch Dee Dee's shoulder, and my daughter let go of me to walk over to her mother and put her arm around her waist. Donna, although she didn't seem very pleased with this public display of affection, she had never been one to deliberately show affection to anyone, especially me in public, nevertheless hugged Dee Dee and said, I'm afraid I can't stay. I just came by to bring your present and tell you I love you. And of course, happy birthday. Donna's voice was pleasant enough, but she was staring at me intently. I didn't care anymore. And now I didn't care if she realized the source of her recent misery or not. I simply reached for the bottle of beer, took a sip and set it on the table. I then touched the tablet controller screen and landed the ET, and then touched the screen again to shut down the ET's Wankel engine. Donna turned and started to walk away, and Dee Dee let go of her mother and came back to stand next to me. I guess there came a point in her life where hugging her father around the waist with her friends standing around watching the whole thing wasn't so cool anymore. Just as Donna reached the patio, Sandy Malloy came out of the back door of the house and called, Who wants cake and ice cream? The girls ran to the picnic table where paper plates and plastic utensils were spread out, and Sandy set out the cake. Seeing each other at the same time, Donna and Sandy held each other's gaze for a moment. Then Donna looked back at me, leaned over and shook her head, swore at me, obviously not caring that her daughter and friends might see it, and headed toward the house toward her car, parked, I guessed, out front. No, Sandy and I weren't a couple or anything like that. This wasn't one of those stories where the cheating guy has a bunch of divorcees or office girls, or even younger sisters-in-law, waiting for him to finally divorce his cheating wife. And while that might have been normal, in this case it was different. Sandy was a single mom to 11-year-old Virginia, my daughter Dee Dee's girlfriend. Sandy had gotten pregnant while still in high school, but never married. Seeing that I had my hands full with the party, she volunteered to stay and help. Sandy had been to our house many times over the past 3 years, either to drop off or pick up Ginny, or to be part of the parental control cell at one of Dee Dee's then little girl meetings that Ginny was invited to. So, naturally, Sandy was privy, thanks to her daughter's close association with mine, to more details than I would have preferred concerning the crisis in my marriage and its subsequent dissolution last year. After Donna left, the girls joined Sandy, Diz, and me for cake and ice cream, then opened presents and handed out handfuls of small candies that the girls had thought they had scammed some time ago, after the incident with the fake piñata and its wet surprise. Afterward, Diz and I gave the girls a brief description and demonstration of E.T. and Enola Gay, while we fiddled with 2 drones in the backyard. Of course, these days, the more acceptable term is unmanned aerial vehicle, or UAV, since the term drone has fallen out of favor with civil libertarians who object to the government's use of military and police versions of these vehicles domestically and with nominal American citizens fighting terrorists against U.S. interests abroad. While the FAA was still delaying approval and licensing of commercial UAVs until 2015 or even later, Dees and I were doing all the basic research and testing we could afford. We regularly maneuvered 2 UAVs at minimum altitudes and on private lands nearby to be on the cutting edge of the UAV business when FAA restrictions were lifted. We may have broken a whole bunch of rules, but we laughingly told ourselves we could keep it up as long as we stayed literally under the radar. Ha ha. We also received overseas contracts and cash advances to produce new and even better copies of E.T. and Enola Gay from 2 Diz cousins in India. These 2 brothers were already planning to introduce drone delivery not restricted by Indian laws. Here in the US, only the CEOs of Amazon.com and Domino's Pizza have publicly announced it so far. 2 Indian entrepreneurs dreamed of becoming commercial leaders in Southeast Asia in the use of UAVs for remote sensing, electromagnetic, biological, and chemical. Commercial aerial movie production was also a lucrative avenue. Bollywood, the home of the Indian film industry, was already demanding their productions. Add to that oil and gas exploration and even mineral exploration and mountain rescue. Many climbers from around the world needed emergency supplies while waiting to be rescued in the Himalayas. We talked about the possibility of getting a lot of money, or rupees, as the case may be. I was quite surprised at the size of the advance and the promise of a lucrative reward. After all, Dees and I had only been doing this since he finished his master's degree last year while interning in the UAV research program. The FAA has given final approval for large-scale UAV research to only 3 universities: Texas AANDM, Virginia Tech, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Diz was involved in the UAF program when he started renting a room from us. Diz was working hard to earn his degree while interning at UAF's test sites in Pendleton, just a few miles south of the Oregon-Washington border, and Tillamook on the Oregon coast just west of Portland. He came to us at a time when Donna and I were in desperate need of short-term extra income and decided to rent a room in a house. Diz was the first to respond to the ad, and although Donna was hesitant at first about renting a room to a foreigner on a student visa, she eventually agreed. Diz moved in a week after we first met. Since my house was in Woodland, Washington, not far from Vancouver and north of it, along the Columbia River, it allowed us to get to Pendleton in about 3 hours and Tillamook in 2 hours. Diz only had to go to these places during exams. The rest of the time he did his graduate school coursework while working at my house. And after my divorce, I let him live there for free. Although Dee's name was Nirmal, everyone called him Dees and he didn't seem to mind. One learned that the word Desi was a Sanskrit term for the people, culture, and products of the Indian subcontinent or South Asia. From there, it wasn't hard to guess that he might be called Dizzy or Diz. When someone first called him Diz, he hesitated briefly, for about 5 seconds, but then smiled and agreed, realizing that his acceptance of the nickname coincided with his new friend's acceptance of him as part of our collection of friends and associates. Before my divorce, I discreetly reconnected with Dees after he brought me up to speed on the potential financial tsunami looming over the commercial drone industry. I was already having difficulties in my relationship with my then-wife Donna, especially when it came to finances. She and I had drastically different ideas about spending, saving, investing, and planning for our financial future. So I quietly asked my attorney to help me hide my investment in the drone research and development that Diz was now doing for his cousins after he was released from the NDA associated with his college internship. I was glad that the terms of my divorce from this. Donna passed before the terms of my part of the business agreement with Diz and his cousins were finalized. This meant that any profits I made from my new venture were excluded from the divorce agreement and would not go to Donna. After Dee Dee's birthday party was over, we gave one of Dee Dee's friends a ride to her house. Now we were driving home. Dee Dee was sitting in the back seat. Dylan sat up front with me, shaking his head and occasionally whispering words while listening to music through his smartphone and headphones. "Dad?" Dylan asked, tapping the phone screen to stop the music. "What does it mean when Elvis Presley says, 'There's no such area'?" It took me a few seconds to distract myself from thoughts of Dee Dee's birthday party, Donna's brief visit and her somewhat violent outburst, and the aftermath of Dee Dee's friend coming home. Now it came to me what Dylan meant. "Oh, you mean the old Return to Sender song?" I asked. He nodded and I continued. "Your Grandpa Taylor, my dad, must have told me that when I asked him years ago. He said that when he was a teenager, when Elvis was still alive and young and at the height of his musical powers, the U.S. Postal Service had not yet introduced zip codes. Since most cities in America had only one post office, it was not necessary. But major cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles had more than one post office, and the cities were divided into delivery zones corresponding to the location of those post office buildings. I looked at him and saw that he was looking out the windshield and nodding understandingly. He then asked me, "What does it mean when Elvis says he dropped a letter in the mailbox and sent it to Special D?" I replied, "These days, when you send a letter or package with special handling instructions, the U.S. Postal Service classifies it as certified, return receipt, requested, priority, express mail, or something like that. Back in the day, before those services came along, any special handling instructions or rush delivery requests were classified as special delivery, or, as some people called it, and as you heard in the old Elvis song, Special D." Dylan nodded again and continued listening to his music. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that Dee Dee had dozed off after all the excitement of the previous night and the tedious preparation and execution of her birthday party. I could sympathize. I had to go through it all with her, just as I had to go through all the nonsense I had to go through with Donna's appearance tonight. I pushed aside my irritation at Donna, looked lovingly at Dee Dee, and thought, my little girl, yes, my little girl, is growing up just like her brother. Then my thoughts returned to Dylan's question about an Elvis song he heard on the Oldies channel on the streaming music app on his smartphone. I suddenly laughed out loud, causing Dee Dee to open his eyes and look at me curiously in the rearview mirror. Shifting my attention back to the road, I continued to giggle, pondering the line from the song again. Yes, I thought, remembering the most important message I had ever sent to my now ex-wife. I sent it to Special D. The wedding was sudden and unprepared. It took place just 2 weeks after Donna and I graduated from high school and a couple months after we turned 18. She in April and me in May. Donna was pregnant and everyone thought I was the culprit. Even though I tried to contradict my father and her that she had dated at least 4 other guys while we were dating, my father asked me if I had really had sex with Donna. When I tilted my head to avoid his disapproving gaze and nodded, he invoked an ancient, undocumented, and unofficial, but still observed in some mountain communities, redneck legal aphorism. If the maker of a bad check cannot be found, the responsibility falls on the last endorser. A week later, I was to kiss the bride. It wasn't hard because I'd been lusting after Donna for over a year and I really liked her, despite her apparent preference for playing the field for our entire senior year. Besides, Donna Swinford really was a beauty. In fact, she had been the prettiest girl in our class since she had moved on to 2nd grade, and her feminine figure had begun to blossom. And she knew it. During her time at school, Donna had utilized the power of her looks many times. She was considered the queen bee of the school. She won over boys and destroyed other girls with her looks, comments, and attitude. There were rumors that she even seduced a couple of male teachers to get passing grades, but the latter was never confirmed. And to this day, as far as I know, she never told anyone. Everything else was common knowledge, though. After we were legally married, Donna's dad offered to let us live in a small apartment above his garage while we tried to become parents, work, and pursue higher education. After our baby was born, Donna's mom, while not particularly happy with our situation, was nevertheless happy to look after Dylan during the day while Donna worked at her day job, and I attended community college and worked part-time in the evenings a few times a week. Nevin, we may not have had the best start to our married life, but Donna and I grew as a family and began to enjoy our life together, and even began to feel a sense of true love as far as I could tell. We struggled financially at first, but Donna and I had pretty good jobs. With the pay raise I got when I graduated from community college with a business degree and was hired by a local company, we were able to breathe a little easier. In our first year together, our sex life was amazing. I had never had such a constant supply of sex as I did now that I was a husband. And Donna, who had enjoyed sex even before we were married, enjoyed our sex life immensely. At least it seemed that way to me at the time. Not 2 years later, our sexual activity began to subtly decline. We still got together often to roll around on the sheets, but I began to notice a decrease in the frequency of sex. And it coincided with Donna spending more time outside the house, meeting friends at work, helping a friend throw Mary Kay parties, and getting a small cut of the organizer's fees, and attending a walking group for mothers. Only in the latter of these 3 events was Donna able to engage Dylan, as she was able to ride him in a jogging stroller we found at the store, along with the other young moms and their children in the group. On the other 2 occasions, I stayed home with my infant and then toddler son, or asked Donna's mom to help me when I was working or studying. All in all, our sexual activity had dropped to perhaps its lowest level since our wedding day, when one evening Donna approached me with a concerned look. Dylan, now 2 years old, was playing with a stuffed dog at my feet while I studied when Donna finally spoke from her seat at the table across from me. "Honey, I'm so sorry," she said quietly with a sad expression on her face. I had to distract myself from the financial problem I was doing as homework for one of my courses, so it took me a few seconds to respond to her. "Honey, what are your regrets?" I finally asked. "Glenn, I'm pregnant again." And I looked up in surprise, feeling a genuine sense of joy at this news. However, I realized from the look on Donna's face that the situation didn't bode well for her. "Honey, this is wonderful news," I said, getting up and going around the table to give her a hug. She didn't get up immediately. Instead, I took her hands and pulled her to me for a hug and kiss. Her enthusiasm may not have waned when we started kissing, but eventually she returned the flick of my tongue with her own. And I tried to convey to her that I was very excited at the prospect of being a father again. After all, Dylan turned out to be an adorable baby and had yet to experience the terrible twins we kept hearing about from friends. It's been just under 9 months since the night Deanne made her debut into our family. Let me tell you, this little girl had captured my heart from the moment the doctor severed physical ties with her mother, wiped her down, wrapped her up, and handed her to me to stand on the scale. I was now an official member of the Squeeze Club as my daughter's father, and at the time I didn't even know it. "Honey," I asked, stunned, "what's wrong?" Donna pulled herself together and looked at me strangely for a while. Then she smiled mischievously through her tears and said, "Glenn, honey, I'm just so exhausted from labor and my mind and body are so exhausted from the medications and all my hormones trying to get back to normal. I'm so sorry for all these emotions." For a while, she continued to look at me strangely. At that moment, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Of course, today, I know exactly what caused that emotional turmoil. However, at that moment, I thought there was something wrong with what she was saying, but I chose to believe her story out of love for her and our 2 children, as well as my own excitement. "Donna, I know all of this has been hard. Right now, you are just resting and getting ready for your trip home tomorrow. Mommy Swinford has already got everything ready for the nursery and is looking forward to us all coming home, especially little Dinah." I smiled at her with all the love I was capable of at that moment. Donna looked back at me and responded with a smile and a raised eyebrow, one of the non-verbal signals that invites a kiss. I complied, and we both giggled as we heard Deanna squirm between us. Donna had had her tubes tied after Deanna was born, declaring that 2 children were enough for her. We talked about it, and while I'm not one to want to block off all avenues to expanding our family, I eventually agreed with her. 11 years later, almost to the exact date, I found out that we had been living a lie for a very long time. Once I got my degree and got a good job, as I mentioned, we began to feel the financial burden we had been carrying up to that point lessen. We still had a lot of debt, but now it was manageable. Banks like to divide debts into good and bad debts. We soon achieved such a balance between good and bad debts that, thanks to recent changes in banking regulations, we qualified for a low-interest home loan. We were also fortunate enough to find a small but cozy home that was affordable due to the bank's desire to generate income from a property that had been foreclosed on when it was abandoned during the divorce proceedings. Everyone was happy. The bank, because it was now making money from the real estate. Donna and I, because we now had our own place. Mama and Papa Swinford, because we were finally out of their garage apartment. Mama Swinford wasn't as happy because she didn't get to see Dylan and Dee Dee as often. When Dee Dee started kindergarten, Donna successfully, but after some hesitation on my part, asked me to allow her to return to work during the daytime hours when the kids were in school. She assured me that she would not allow our family time or special time with the kids or me to be diminished or harmed. For the most part, she kept that promise. About the time Dylan was about to enter high school in the Vancouver area where we lived, Grandpa Taylor had to go through the grief of Grandma Taylor's passing. After a while, he called Dad and me over to his house. "Tom," he addressed my father, "I know you and Ruth love your home and don't want to move. That's why I want you to consider letting me give this house to Glenn as a bequest passing from one generation to the next. It's in good condition, and it's paid for." And I expected Dad to object to his own father being at a disadvantage, but he seemed to accept it. After all, he and Mom weren't exactly rich but financially secure. I was still surprised and asked, "Grandpa, don't you want to stay here, among the memories of Grandma and you together?" "Son," Grandma Taylor said with a sad smile, "that's exactly why I need to move out of here. These memories are so sweet, it makes me sad that she isn't here to talk to me about them. No, I want you to keep this house for your young family, and I'll take the old van from the public warehouse and go on a road trip to see some of the places in the Northwest that I never got to see before I got too old for it." So Donna and I and our two children became tenants of my Grandpa Taylor's house in Woodland, just north of Vancouver. When the new deed was being registered, Grandpa Taylor insisted that it be in my name only. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I'm glad he did. It made the house somewhat divorce-proof. If he hadn't, it would have been very difficult for me to fight and win the custody battle that resulted from our divorce. Last year, Diz had been renting a room with us for about 8 months when I noticed a change in his behavior. It took him a few weeks to loosen up after his first visit, but after that, Donna and I were able to easily engage him in conversation. He was even surprisingly patient with 13-year-old Dylan's almost incessant stream of questions. Dee Dee had come to terms with Dee's presence, but still seemed a bit reserved with him. I noticed a change in Dee's demeanor, but figured he must be trying to solve some technical problem with the drones we were experimenting with. Yes, I said, he was. The company I worked for regularly in Vancouver was coordinating a fairly large-scale catering operation for several airlines flying out of Portland International Airport in Oregon. PDX was located across the Columbia River from Vancouver, Washington, just 13 miles down Washington's Highway 14 and I-205. Each day, our suppliers, chefs, packers, and transporters prepared, packaged, and delivered custom meals to PDX for the flight attendants of the large planes, who set out the main meals and cooked vegetables in the galley warmers, and walked around the plane distributing the in-flight meals. We took pride in providing quality prepared meals at a very favorable price. The fixed operations coordinator at PDX agreed with this assessment and renewed our contract with us every year. Because of this, we were a very profitable enterprise. Some of the profits were distributed in the form of periodic bonuses rather than salaries and wages. As a department manager, I received some bonuses that were surprisingly generous. As I mentioned early in our marriage, I realized that Donna and I had very different ideas about financial management. To keep the bonus money from becoming a financial river visibly draining away from my family, I took a number of protective measures. I found an advisory team consisting of two brothers, one a certified financial planner, and the other a lawyer. They helped me create an investment portfolio by providing tax and legal advice that came with their services. When the D's cousins made their offer via email and then a Skype video conference, I was finally convinced that investing in their venture could be very financially rewarding and was willing to take the risk. What I was not willing to do was share the financial benefits with Donna, as it was at this time that I learned about her secret life. In this case, my investment team helped me keep this investment venture a secret from Donna and also helped me meet my deadline before the divorce proceedings were finalized. Why did I keep this from my wife and not include it in our family financial picture, you ask? Yes, because I finally convinced Dees to tell me what was bothering him. Glenn, D.C., he said hesitantly, you know I've been testing camera support on the first UAV to track and hold station? When I nodded, still embarrassed by his awkwardness, he continued. So the software stabilization is now such that I can hold a moving object. In addition, Dees continued, the GPS positioning feature and the UAV's more robust engine now allow me to hold it in a fixed position on the ground for up to 4 hours. The video recording feature on the tablet controller allows me to record video for even longer, but the determining factor in this case is how long the vehicle is in the air. I knew wildlife conservationists really needed these features to be able to keep an eye on herds of bison, caribou, and elk. And the new quieter Wankel engines we had installed didn't make enough noise to scare the surveillance subjects, and at the same time please the environmental noise Nazis. Diz started talking about technical details I had no idea about and took his eyes off me. I sighed and touched his shoulder, forcing him to face me again. Diz, stay on topic. What's bothering you so much? I asked. You know I'd like to help in any way I can. I was still convinced it was all about some complex technical obstacle he was facing. While I couldn't provide much help with the technical aspects of our project, I was quite willing to continue to fulfill my part of the obligations of our partnership. Not only did I provide capital, but I offered Dee's housing, a place to assemble and test equipment, my garage, and, especially important for focused engineers prone to mood swings, support. Glenn, He paused and thought for a second, looking at me. Then he reached for the controller of his tablet. I'll just show you. His eyes raced when he said this, and he continued the odd comment, reverting back to his old Indian speech habits. But please don't blame the messenger. Diz picked up the tablet controller, turning on the saved video. At first, it was hard to understand exactly what I was watching. The movements were blurry and uneven at first. The video stabilization worked here, he explained, zooming in on the tablet screen as the moving pictures on the screen began to flow smoothly into each other. I watched the ground beneath the UAV in the video move across the 9-inch screen. I noticed grass and trees being replaced by asphalt and concrete. Apparently, he was taking the UAV out of an area bounded by fields and forests and into more built-up areas. I suppose I could have knocked on your window, but I didn't want to scare you and endanger the UAV. At those words, he sort of grinned. I still didn't understand what he was talking about. Then it came to me what I was seeing on the screen. I was looking at me. It was a video of me sitting at my desk and talking on speakerphone in my office at work. I could hear nothing but the hum of drones, traffic noise, and other activity you would expect in a commercial district. All right, you filmed this right outside my office window, exclaimed I. Diz only nodded, continuing to watch me. I was impressed with the quality of the video. Of course, I smiled, realizing that our company should pay more attention to the details of the building cleaning and maintenance contract. The window through which I was watching myself on the video from the outside was visibly covered in dirt and in desperate need of cleaning. I couldn't help but smirk. Suddenly, the image on the screen changed to a rainbow of pastel and dark colors. Figures that used to be on the regular video were now only visible in outline, but the colors were strange. It felt like I was in the middle of a weather radar image on the Weather Channel. It's an infrared view, Dees said before I could ask. Now that I realized I was watching the video in infrared, I realized that the different colors actually represented different heat signatures. The window, since it was in direct sunlight, was obviously distorting what was viewed through it because it had its own heat signature. Diz, that's great, I said with a grin. The wildlife guys are going to be thrilled when they try to track the herds. Diz didn't say anything back to that. He pulled back the tablet controller and activated what looked like another video file. He sighed and held it out for me to view. This time, the video started in IR mode. From the visible outlines, I realized that the UAV was hovering over a parked car, which, judging by the heat signatures, had a driver and one passenger inside. As I watched, human figures emerged from the car and moved toward the rear. Their actions were indistinguishable, but it could indicate that they took something from the trunk of the car. They moved away from the car and I noticed the angle of the video changed to keep them in view, but the position of the UAV didn't change. I had to go around the tree they moved under after taking the blanket out of the trunk of the car. Dee spoke nervously. I noticed that the sing-songy intonations that characterized the speech of the subcontinent's inhabitants had returned to his voice. Diz sighed again as the screen switched from IR mode to video mode. That way I could verify that the video was shot in daylight, late morning or early afternoon, judging by the lighting. In addition, I could make out a nude Donna, my wife in the arms of Dean Winston. Winston was one of our classmates in high school and was well known as the Horn Dog. He was also one of the 3 or 4 guys Donna was dating when she and I got married because she was pregnant with Dylan. Needless to say, a year before Diz's revelations, I was not thrilled to learn that Dean Winston, after graduating from Boise State University and working in Seattle for a few years, had returned to Vancouver. Not only that, he was now working for the same company as Donna. How's that for disgusting convenience? The moment Dean and Donna appeared on the screen naked, her lying on her back on the blanket and him between her thighs, about to get down to business, I turned away and whimpered. I shoved my hands in my pockets to avoid hitting something in anger. Or someone. Diz stopped the video and clutched the tablet controller to his chest. I'm sorry, my friend, Diz said. I just wanted to see if the tracking and loitering features could be tested on easily recognizable people and objects. Thus, I used mostly you and your wife so you could test how well our systems worked. When I started, I never imagined that... Diz let his voice break and fall silent, as I was no longer listening to him at this point. After about 3 minutes of silence in the room, broken only by the heavy sound of angry air coming out of my nose, I finally spoke. Is this the only thing you have? I asked. Diz hesitated for a few seconds, then said, I have 3 other cases recorded, but there have been others. There was silence again. After about 30 seconds, I asked, And each time is about the same? I didn't really want to know that, but at this point it just had to be said. After all, my thoughts had already turned to something to do with the dissolution of the marriage. No, Diz replied. From the other 3 videos and from other cases I've observed, it appears that they take long lunch breaks together and drive out to this quiet neighborhood near Vancouver. They usually stay in his car and… Here he just tapped the screen to launch another video. No, the brightness and contrast are quite different in this video, and I commented on it. It's because of the rain, Diz said. I nodded. Yes, Vancouver and Portland had gotten a lot of rain in the spring. I could see why they wanted to stay in Dean Winston's car when they had their own connections. Hell, I remember Winston bragging about his new car with the huge panoramic sunroof. Some cars had a solid glass roof, others had multiple panels. All were designed to open the entire interior to the sun and tilt back, opening at least part of the interior to the outside. Some enjoyed the wind in their hair, others just sat and gazed at the stars in the evenings. Of course, in the rain, which was quite frequent here in the Vancouver and Portland area, the panoramic hatch still offered a view, but without having to endure rain in the face or, in the case of the ladies, in the hair. Dean Winston had a Chrysler 300S with all the trimmings, including a double panoramic sunroof, which he liked to brag about. Yes, the ladies liked to have sex in the luxury of my car while enjoying the beauty of the sun and stars overhead. I heard him say this at least twice at the work parties I was forced to attend with Donna. I never heard my wife mention Dean, nor did I ever see her do anything at those parties that would make me suspicious. I guess the two of them, my wife and her longtime lover, have gotten good at masking signs of infidelity. When Diz handed me the tablet so I could see my whore wife's infidelity, I saw that the heat signatures showed the two of them engaged in activities similar to the way people undress in the front seat of a car. In doing so, they were kissing frequently. Finally, I saw the passenger move to the back seat and assume what I assume was a hands and knees pose. The driver then moved between the front seats and joined another person in the back seat who apparently approached the passenger from behind. Fluctuating heat signatures and the movement of the vehicle confirmed what was happening. Before they moved into the back seat, I saw no indication that the driver had attempted any additional groin action, so I assumed it was non-consensual sex, which of course is horrible. Not only was my crappy wife cheating on me, she was jeopardizing my health and possibly my life by exposing us both to an unknown number of this son of a bitch's sexual partners. Diz, I said finally, I'm going to need copies of those videotapes. It looks like my soon-to-be ex-wife and I are going to have a fight over her extracurricular activities, so to speak. I'll also need those videotapes when I petition the court for custody of my children. Diz nodded and said, Given her history, are you sure? He stopped abruptly, but I realized what he meant. Were these children even mine? That had to be tested in terms of biology. But in terms of love, it didn't matter. My children were my children. I didn't care who the sperm donor was. I loved Dylan and Dee Dee, and they loved me. I wouldn't give them up without a serious fight, and even after that, I wouldn't rest until I could get them back. Still, Diz was right. Yeah, I should probably get a DNA test, shouldn't I? I'm sorry, my friend, Dee said with an apologetic look. I nodded and put a hand on his shoulder encouragingly. The last clip was still going on, and I sighed. Hey, Diz, I said as anger rose up in my thoughts. But I held it back in my voice. Do you have any real videotapes, not related to these cases? Diz, with a proud expression on his face, stopped the current videotape and turned on another. This time, the videotape was running normally, and you could see their heads and faces from behind and just above the back of Winston's car. It only took a few seconds before the image changed back to infrared, right above the car. I looked at Diz with a question on my face. I dipped behind the car for a few seconds to get a clear shot, Diz replied. However, I only managed to keep the UAV there for a few seconds, barely enough to get a clear shot, before I was out of their sight. I didn't want to alert them to the presence of the UAV and the camera. Donna knows how much effort you and I have put into this program, and she's seen some of the demonstrations we've done here. She would immediately recognize a drone if she saw one, and she would also know it was probably filming. I had already crossed the threshold of logical thinking in the situation I found myself in today when Diz revealed his secret. Now I had crossed over to the emotional level. I was hurting on a personal level, but I was also worried about my children. But mostly I felt anger and bitterness over the two hurrahs I saw in the video. My loving wife not only cheated on me, but put me at physical risk by letting asshole baby do her without protection. I was infuriated by the contempt and disrespect with which she conducted this ploy of hers. Yes, divorce is one thing, revenge is quite another. My attorney, Myrna Hawk, had all the paperwork ready by the time Diz and I finally realized it was Revenge Day. Sounds like a catchy movie title, doesn't it? I inquired, and Diz confirmed that the cheaters' midday rendezvous happened on Fridays. He informed me that it always happened during the extended lunch hour on Fridays. Casual Friday dress code rules allowed them to wear clothes that were easier and quicker to put on and take off, and sometimes on Tuesdays, the day of the week with the least workload. I gave copies of the videotapes that Dees had already given me, burned to DVD-Rs, to Myrna Hawk and asked her the questions necessary to determine how best to serve my wife in a way that would be as painful and embarrassing as possible. She informed me that she could deliver the papers to anywhere within a 20-mile radius of Woodland, and even to the northern edge of Vancouver, where Donna's work was located, within an hour, and into the hands of the recipient within 2 hours. I printed one shot of the happy couple as they had sex in the missionary position on a blanket under the trees. I will include this shot in my divorce packet. The DVD-R with these videotapes was to remain in Myrna Hawk's office just out of precaution. Meanwhile, I surreptitiously took swabs and hair samples from both of my children, the first while they were asleep, the second from the comb and comb on their mirrored dressers. It only took a few weeks to get the results. I included Myrna Hawk's office address as my return address. So there I was in Myrna's small conference room when I discovered that Dylan was, in fact, all mine. Wow, looks like Dad and Mr. Swinford were right to make me marry Donna at that time. My hand trembled slightly as I looked over the second set of results. Dinah wasn't mine. Well, biologically, she always would have been mine if I could have helped it. I loved my baby girl too much to lose her in the machinations my soon-to-be ex-wife was probably up to. The second result hardened my heart even more. This Winston story was clearly not the first time she had spread her legs in front of another guy while married to me. She, who was supposed to belong only to me, was obviously something of a bus stop for her various lovers. They could come and go as long as she made a schedule where it could be done without me finding out. The day of revenge had to be chosen carefully, depending on the weather on the Friday chosen. In fact, it took Dees and I another 4 weeks of patiently waiting, and simultaneously replenishing our video storage, before a suitable day appeared on the horizon. It was May, and the weather forecast for the coming Friday was not only mostly sunny, but also suggested a surprisingly low humidity level of 15%. If the couple didn't get out of the car, they would probably accomplish their feat in the back seat with the panoramic roof open outward. It all depended on the weather, but Dees and I were ready to perform either way. "Oh, Glenn, are you sure about this? It's so disgusting," Diz complained. We were busy pouring the contents of the bucket into one of several special weather balloons I'd found at a military surplus store. We were practicing the bombing capabilities of the UAV, which was now called the Enola Gay. Diz had designed an explosive device based on compressed CO2, and we filled one of the balloons with water. Diz carefully inserted the explosive device inside the filled balloon, whereupon I sealed it and led the pull cord outside. Around the seal, we attached a few turns of cloth tape and made a loop out of it. This loop will be used to hold a remotely activated pizza delivery grabber on the underside of the Enola Gay UAV. A single tap on the tablet controller screen would cause the grabber to release the load on command. When the balloon was lowered far enough to create enough tension on the slackened drive cord, the bursting device would release CO2 in a sudden explosion of water, or whatever might have been the balloon's contents at that moment. I insisted that we do 3 trial runs with the water balloons in the backyard. The last 2 rehearsals we did with a UAV with alternating strobe lights, which we now called ET, after the name of a famous movie in which the spaceship delivering and picking up the movie's main character had lots of flashing lights. "You bet," I said in response to Diz's question. "I want them to be in the shit. Literally." As I said this, I was pouring more and more of the obnoxious mixture of piss and shit into the big weather balloon. This act was inspired by a car ride when, feeling sorry for myself, I pulled into a small parking lot operated by the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission. This primitive place, which had retained its greenness and pristineness, as local tree advocates like to say, had an equally primitive outhouse instead of a chemical toilet, like most modern places. Then I smiled slyly as the idea of revenge hit me. I, like Diz, made sure to wear surgical gloves as I filled the balloon. Next to us was a bucket with a mixture of bleach and water, as well as some sort of disinfectant. Once we finished filling the balloon, we wanted to carefully seal it and hang it on a hook in the garage while we dipped our hands in the cleaning mixture. It would be hell for Deez and me if, after getting revenge on the crooks, we contracted hepatitis or something else equally horrible. We also had to be careful not to overfill the balloon. Previous versions of the water balloons had been a bit fuller, so we could provide a safety margin against the weight and mass of the payload that would be delivered in reality. Now all that was left to do was wait another hour or so for Dean Winston and my wife Donna to get off work for their weekly Friday mid-afternoon sex session. I walked over to my tablet controller and started the ET engine about 10 minutes before the crooks would normally leave the building. After 30 seconds of warm-up, I lifted the ET from its hiding place in the tree crowns on the opposite side of the parking lot from the building where my wife worked. I practiced with the camera mounted under the ET using a gimbal and got pretty good at changing the orientation of the camera as the platform moved. When I left the ET in hover mode, I practiced with camera movement and zoom to make sure the mount didn't jam at an inopportune moment. I wanted to make sure I captured all the excruciatingly awkward action. I couldn't help but marvel at the fact that I was more than 13 miles away from where ET was watching my wife work. An alibi? You bet. Sure enough, Donna and Dean walked out the door leading to the parking lot together and right on time. They didn't even seem to care what their coworkers thought about it, which probably partially explained the "you poor sucker" looks I'd gotten from some of my wife's coworkers in recent work meetings. Okay, Diz, we know where they're going. Let's load up the Enola Gay, I said to my friend. With those words, we carefully removed the filled balloon from the hook in the garage. We had a creepy moment where I almost lost my grip, but we paused, restored my pulse to 650, and carried the balloon to where Enola Gay was sitting. Next, I left it to Deez. He was an expert at attaching a thrust activator for the hopper and a suspension mechanism to carry the payload. I went back to monitoring the ET and moving it into place. I guess I was so focused on my lesson that I didn't even notice the Enola Gay was on its way until Deez sat down next to me with a tablet controller in hand. We looked at each other and shook fists, then returned our attention to the screens in front of us. The overhead view of Dean Winston's moving Chrysler quickly grew boring, but the excitement of what we were doing energized us and kept us focused. The drive to the favorite parking spot that Donna and Dean usually used took no more than 10 minutes, and today was no different. Diz chuckled beside me and said quietly, "Oh yeah." When I asked what he meant, he grinned and said, "Look at the hatch." Then, turning the camera and zooming in slightly to get a good view, I saw that Winston had opened the panoramic sunroof of his luxury car so they could feel the spring breeze as they drove. I silently prayed that they would leave it open. It had rained the night before, so the ground was very wet. Today, however, the weather was perfect, mid-60s, mostly sunny, and the humidity had left the area for a while. The conditions were just right for our purposes. As soon as the car stopped, the couple got out of it and saw that the ground was too wet to do it on the pad under the trees. They began to enjoy themselves. Damn, thought I, she's still a fox, even though she's bent over. I noticed in passing that Dean Winston's gear was in the Goldilocks category. Not too big and not too small, just noticeably, unfit for life. And I watched and gritted my teeth as my wife, with whom we've been together for almost 15 years, opened the rear passenger door of the car and stepped inside. I started down the ET and videotaped the moment Dean leaned in and kissed my wife. I couldn't help it. I had to wipe the sudden moisture from my eyes. This marriage had been dying since I discovered Donna's duplicitous nature, but a date had not yet been set. Now it had been set. Today was the day. I pushed ET aside, away from their eyes, and told Deez to start running. From that point, I slowly and carefully moved the ET to a position below my line of sight and behind the curve of the trunk of the car in which the crooks were now entertaining themselves. I was about to pass out when I heard Deez sound the alarm. "Great," he said almost with a shout. Catching himself, he said, "Last run. Strobe and arrow at 3, 2, 1." And then, in a calm voice, Just above a loud whisper, he said, "Now." I raised the ET to the level of the rear windshield. I had time to notice the look on the couple's faces as I turned on first the strobes and then the police signal. Today, I covered the strobes with dark blue tape. As the bright alternating lights went out, I chuckled briefly, thinking about what must be going on in that couple's head. The light looked like the headlights of a police cruiser. Whoop! Whoop! This sound is almost universally recognized in the United States as the alarm of a police unit. As planned, the startled couple stopped moving and froze in place for only a few seconds. Their astonished expressions were captured for posterity on a videotape obtained from IT. I smiled at their awkwardness and congratulated myself for surprising them so thoroughly that I almost didn't hear Diz. Bombs away. I must confess, I had not expected anything as disgustingly unpleasant as what the IT video capture showed me on the screen. The movement in the car behind the couple in my viewfinder looked like something falling through the sunroof, but it only lasted a split second before the rear windshield, except for the area covered by the couple's heads and shoulders, was covered in a disgusting brown film. It took the couple a split second to realize that they were now covered in a brown haze of piss and soft shit, as was the entire interior of Dean Winston's precious luxury Chrysler 300S. They were looking out the rear window when Deeze's device burst, so there was minimal urine on their faces, just the residue of feces from the car's ceiling. That was the plan when Deeze and I planned the attack. I had to make sure they were facing the bursting ball of shit so the shit didn't get in their eyes. We didn't want to blind them, or nose or mouth. We didn't want them to swallow any of it. It's one thing to tell someone, eat shit and shut up. It's quite another to realize that if they ate any of that crap, they might get so sick they'd die. I wanted to get back at them, not worry about avoiding a murder charge. Rounds are over, Diz said in a suddenly authoritative voice. Then, already in a softer tone, he pronounced, "I believe it is time for marching order, my friend." With those words, we steered the Enola Gay and ET away from the area, keeping as low as possible. We got them home in 20 minutes and, sipping Budweiser Black Crown beers, cheered each other on. Diz drove off at my behest, leaving me at home to await Donna's inglorious return. I activated the ET again to follow the curve of the main thoroughfare into our neighborhood and quickly brought it back to us and parked it in the garage when I saw the Chrysler swerve. I had already alerted Myrna Hawk to have her bailiff nearby and on 10-minute standby. She gave me his cell phone number, and I entered it and pressed the button for him to take care of his business, just as my wife's lover drove his car down our street and up to my house. My car was parked on the other side of the street, so Donna didn't have to know I was home. I had to admit that Winston's Chrysler was a beautiful car, at least externally. When he put the car in park, I could still see the brown streaks on the inside of the windshield. Apparently, he wiped them off with his undershirt or something so he could see them while driving. When the passenger door opened, a haggard figure emerged from it. Donna's face was clean of the contaminants that had obviously soaked the interior of Dean's car, including all the clothes they'd piled in the front trunk while they'd taken care of business in the back. I realized this after watching the Enola Gay video while Dean and I were having a beer after surgery. Deese's aim was phenomenal. The shitball entered the car exactly centered through the open panoramic sunroof, and the funnel blew its vile contents just a couple inches above the center console between the front bucket seats. Enola Gay's camera captured the effect of the brown explosion, which almost instantly spread throughout the car, even into the trunk where their clothes were stacked. Only a relatively small amount flew out through the sunroof thanks to the direction of focus that Diz had set. The guy was really quite talented at this. I saw another dark car pull up to the curb. The driver got out of it and headed toward my porch. He looked to be about 20 or 30 years old, carrying a large manila envelope. He briskly crossed the yard and caught up with Donna before she could climb the steps. I'd broken the window in the front room, so the sound traveled both ways, from outside to inside and vice versa. He walked over to Donna and began his formal introduction. "Donna." "Donna Taylor?" he asked, and it sounded like he was trying to breathe through his mouth and speak at the same time. "God, that smell must be really awful." "Yeah, but I can't talk right now. She said, trying to wave him away. Bless his heart, he didn't give up and just said, "Here." I looked out the window and saw Donna take the envelope he held out to her. It must have been a reflex. He then walked quickly toward his car and called out, walking behind him, "Donna Taylor, you've been served." He took a picture of her with his phone, without leaving his car to document the event, and also included the date and time she was served. The guy was meticulous, even though he totally disliked my shit-smelling wife. You gotta hand it to him. Winston wanted to leave right away. He probably wanted to get away from his ex-lover, take a shower, find a handyman who had the guts to fix the car, or an arsonist who would just set it on fire and put it out of its misery, and get on with his life in anticipation of the weekend. It took him a few minutes to pull out of my driveway, as the bailiff's car was partially blocking his path. The server reached into his car, pulled out another envelope, and walked over to the driver's window of Dean Winston's car. I didn't hear it, but it seemed to me that the server, having gotten confirmation of Dean's identity, simply tossed the envelope out the window, stepped back to take a picture, and drove off. I guess the odor near the car was as intoxicating as it was near Donna. I moved away from the window so Donna wouldn't see me watching the events happening in my front yard. I heard her sobbing. I don't know if it was a sob of anger, sadness, self-pity, or a little bit of everything. All I know is that it was loud. After that, I heard a few more sobs. She tried her key and found that it no longer worked. I had taken the opportunity this morning to change the locks and replace the garage door opener before the revenge mission had even begun. She didn't know if I was home, but she rang the doorbell anyway and listened. She banged on the door several times and kicked it once with her foot. Then I heard her push the door open and slide down to sit on the porch. It was quiet for a minute. Then I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. I'd turned the ringer off so she couldn't detect my presence in the house. Before answering the call, I headed for the kitchen. "What?" Usually when I saw her number in the caller ID window, I'd reply, "Hi, honey," or some other affectionate word. But not this time. "Glenn, honey, something terrible has happened and I—" She paused, going into a paroxysm of loud and pitiful sobs. I stayed on the line when, after about a minute, she finally pulled herself together. "Oh, Glenn, I can't get into the house. My key doesn't work. And I so need to shower and get cleaned up." Ugh. I almost laughed as I pictured her sitting on the porch crying and feeling the chafing of her shit-soaked clothes. Finally, I spoke up. "Donna, did you get the package I delivered to you?" Yes, she replied. "What is it?" "The rude guy who handed it to me said I was serviced." "What did he mean by that?" I couldn't believe she couldn't guess. "Well, I guess you'll have to open it and see exactly what he meant," I said. I couldn't resist the harsh tone in my reply. I could hear her opening the envelope, probably holding the phone in the hollow between her neck and chin. "Glenn, why are you suddenly being so nasty?" "About—" "Oh, no, 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 no." I instructed Myrna Hawk to see to it that the picture of Donna and Dean doing it in the missionary position on a blanket on the ground was the first one in the divorce packet. From the angle, it would appear to an observer that a tall man with a camera took the picture from about 30 feet away using a zoom lens. The secret of the UAV video will remain with only a few of us. Contrary to most people's expectations, the divorce went a little out of my favor. Perhaps the couple's cheating photo helped. I don't know. Since Washington is a state that does not require a period of separation before divorce, the mechanism worked pretty quickly. I got the house, since the deed was in my name only, but had to provide Donna with a bunch of monetary assets from known accounts. This included only minimal child support for 2 years, as she essentially continued to work. Since I owned the house, the judge ruled that the children's interests would be served if the existing pattern of interaction between parent and child is modified only to the extent necessary due to a change in the parent-child relationship or to protect the child from physical, mental, or emotional harm. Translated into plain language, this meant that they had to stay in the house with me so as not to change the pattern of interaction. To her credit, Donna did not try to portray me as physically, mentally, or emotionally abusive. If she had tried, I gave Myrna Hawk a list of witnesses to confirm that I was not abusive. I couldn't completely remove Dylan and Dee Dee from Donna's influence because the court also established mutual decision-making authority, which meant that Donna could still have a lot of influence over the children's lives. Well, I guess given the way courts tend to bully fathers and the fact that I wasn't being squeezed out of my car, I could give Donna a little leeway without being too picky. Sure, It would be nice not to have to deal with my ex-wife anymore, but I still had Dylan and Dee Dee. So far, I had shielded them from the infidelity associated with the breakup of their parents' relationship. I planned to keep them in the dark as long as possible. Donna rented an apartment a few miles from home. Guess who had to pay for it? It was closer to Vancouver and her place of employment. What annoyed me was the requirement to pay for her cable TV. I checked to see if her package included the Cheater channel, but no luck. I wasn't interested in whether Donna was dating someone or trying any other relationship. The topic was never brought up during the normal handoff of children for visitation, and I didn't ask. All in all, I suffered financially for about 6 months until the income from the business that Dis and I were running with his cousins in India started coming in. The amazing thing was that we didn't have to produce anything. We just had to be the idea men and brokers of the transactions that led to the production, special ordering, and transportation of Dis's designs. We had to bring in another lawyer to handle the export deals because our designs were still not authorized for commercial use here in the US, and there were several trade restrictions on technology exports. But oh boy, when the FAA got out of control and wouldn't give us permission to fly in the United States, the sky, literally, became the limit. I finally got a little financial relief when the court ruled in my favor in an intentional infliction of emotional distress (IIED) lawsuit against Dean Winston. Turns out the guy was up to his eyeballs in debt, and the final amount paid to me after attorney fees and other expenses was only $43,000. Oh well. Meanwhile, I was still making good money at my day job. A few months after the divorce, life changed for the better. However, I started to get a little worried. I got a chuckle when I learned that the insurance agent on Dean Winston's case refused to recognize the car as a total loss, insisting on a thorough cleaning and restoration. I, like Dean, knew he would never get the smell of crap out of his upholstery. Dean continued to claim that the cop was there when the hooligans trashed his car. He insisted that the camera mounted on the police car must have captured some evidence to prove his point. Calls to the State Patrol and the sheriffs of Clark and Cowlitz counties asking for the name of a police officer or deputy who might have been there came up empty. Diz and I kept our mouths shut about the bomb incident. We didn't say or do anything that might arouse suspicion until Donna witnessed our little exhibition tonight at Dee Dee's party and finally connected the dots. I put Dee Dee to bed after we got back from the house we took her friend to. Dylan went to his room and probably sat on the internet before finally falling asleep. "Did you enjoy your 12th birthday, baby girl?" I asked Dee Dee as she pulled the blanket over her. It would probably only be a few months before I would no longer be welcome in her room during her nightly rituals before bedtime. She was definitely growing up right before my eyes. "Daddy," she said quietly in faint desperation. "I'm not your child." She giggled. I couldn't help myself. I started crying quietly. She saw my tears and said, "Daddy, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to." "Sweetheart," I said, enclosing her in my arms, blankets and all. "You'll always be my girl." She hugged me back and said, "I know, Daddy. I know." I kissed her forehead, and as she lay back down again, I looked into her eyes and said, "You're so special, Dee." She smiled at me and closed her eyes. The DNA test results stating that I was not the father of this little girl would never see the light of day if I could help it. I couldn't know for sure, but given the way Donna insisted that I was the one who'd given her the name, the possibility that Dean Winston had impregnated Donna with Deanna when he'd returned from school in Boise all those years ago was pretty high. It could have been Donna's way of making fun of me in private. I don't think she told Winston, even if she knew he might have been Deanna's sperm donor. Otherwise, she would have had to answer questions about her other lovers. And it would probably come up when he tried to dispute my claims against him. It didn't matter now, though. My children were with me, and my cheating ex-whore was out of the house. I went downstairs and looked at my watch, noting that it was only 10 past 9. I didn't usually answer the phone after 9, but the answering machine picked up. I always thought it was rude to call my house after 9 p.m. unless it was an emergency. For some reason, however, it was today when the phone rang at 9:15 that I decided to answer it. I was surprised and delighted at the same time to hear the voice on the other end. Sandy Malloy's voice came through my ear and said with obvious amusement in her tone, "Okay, Glenn, do you want to tell me what that vicious slap from your ex was all about?" Remember when I said this wasn't one of those stories where the cheating boyfriend has ready-made female company at the ready when he finally divorces his cheating wife? Well, I could be wrong, and thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.